This video is brought to you by Project foundEd. Project foundEd is a community of EdTech founders that aim to make the EdTech industry easier to navigate through collective voice and data. Learn more at projectfounded.org. Hi, welcome to this session of EdTech Recharge Studio. I'm Dr. Kripa Sundar, founder and lead consultant at EdTech Recharge. Today, I share with you answers to 4 questions that I often have, and 4 questions that I often ask myself as well. The first one is, what is learning? A second question is perhaps something more nuanced in terms of what is the science of learning and how is it different from the learning sciences? A third question is, how does learning happen? And last is my favorite piece of all, is how can we embed the science of learning in our EdTech, whether that's products, whether that's curriculum, whether it's content, how can we leverage the science of learning to improve learning for all? So let's start with that first question. What is learning? Now, so often as a society, we've been conditioned to think of learning to be the same as performance. Meaning learning is how much we score on an exam, how much we score on a standardized assessment, or even in terms of, am I able to answer this question correctly? And while all of these are commonly accepted measures of learning, I want us to think about learning, especially as people working in EdTech, in a little more broader of a sense. Think about learning as the learning of content. Am I able to share back out what I've learned? Think about learning as the acquisition of skills. Am I now able to edit videos slightly better than I could last year? Think about learning in terms of application. Am I able to learn and apply what I have learned? Let's say, for example, the science of learning to a specific scenario. Am I able to apply it beyond scenarios? But beyond all of this, we also want to think about learning in terms of practice for mastery. Beyond learning content, skills, and applications, we want to push our learners, whether they're K-12, whether they're adult learners, towards mastery. And mastery is just not conquering these 3 pieces, but it is the ability and the discipline to continue practicing towards maintaining that learning. But fundamentally, what is learning, you ask? Learning is when there's a change in our knowledge structures. When I'm able to think about something slightly differently. When I know more and can see the relationships between concepts. When I'm now able to apply something I've learned beyond that individual scenario that I've learned it in. The second question is, what is the science of learning and how is that different from the learning sciences? In full disclaimer, I'm still learning about the broader learning sciences myself, but here's what I know. The science of learning often refers to the research conducted within the fields of cognitive psychology and educational psychology, disciplines of education research that have existed for years. When I say years, I should say centuries. On the other hand, the learning sciences is a more developing field that has a more interdisciplinary approach and combines research across disciplines of human development, of instructional design, of AI and machine learning and computer science, of cognitive psychology, of educational psychology, and brings across all of these different bodies of work with the understanding and concept of a system, of understanding that learning happens in a system, while the science of learning tries to isolate what is that unit level or this very specific strategy and to what extent can it work. Are there overlaps? Absolutely. Are there debates in the field? Absolutely. The most popular framework for learning is referred to as the information processing theory. This theory is grounded on a model that works very much like what computers do now, an input, processing, and output. We call that encoding, which is selecting the right pieces of information. Storage, aka processing, or organizing the knowledge we have. And retrieval, which is output, or being able to integrate our prior knowledge and new knowledge towards application. Essentially, the simple model is often referred to simply as encoding, storage, and retrieval, or you can think of it as input, processing, output, or as selecting, organizing, and integrating, whatever works for you. This model is often referred to as a cold cognitive approach. It assumes a very simple, very clean, very precise system that works consistently. Overall, that is true. More recently, with increasing interest in the learning sciences and development in the fields of cognitive science and educational psychology, amongst other fields, there is a more system-level analysis that comes into play. We now acknowledge that there are many things that come into play to make learning happen. For example, whether the person's had food, are they in good physical health, are they emotionally ready to learn, are their cognitive resources directed towards managing their stress, managing their high threat levels, versus are they available to actually process and learn. We're also thinking about how identity plays a role in how students learn. We're thinking about how capable are students in their executive functioning skills, which can refer to like planning, organizing, being able to accept feedback and work on it, metacognition. All of these pieces come under the bigger bucket of executive functioning. There's also conversations around how all of these are dynamic pieces and very unique to every individual learner and their contexts. So when we design EdTech, whether that's a product or a curriculum or a program, we need to keep in mind that there are so many pieces that can impact that product success. To what extent can you control these will temper the claims you can make in terms of your impact and efficacy. For that reason, I often like to recommend folks to think about that input, processing, output, or the encoding, storage, retrieval process, because those are things that we can help facilitate to a greater extent than, say, helping with a student's current emotional health or their current physical health. So now on to the next question. How can we design for learning? Knowing about the science of learning, knowing the learning sciences is all good and great. But how can we design for learning? I want you to take a minute and write down, for your context, what is learning? How are you going to define learning? Is it going to be improved literacy scores on a standardized test? Is it going to be improved literacy scores in a class test? Is it going to be a student reading 12 books this month? Is this going to be math proficiency at fluency levels? Is it going to be math proficiency at accuracy? Is it going to be a combination of that? When we say that a student has learned something, what exactly are we trying to say? Let's have that definition in place. If you have that definition in place, I've created for you something I like to call the learning bingo. The learning bingo are the mix and match of strategies. Like I mentioned, there's no 100% guarantee that us employing all of these strategies will concretely increase learning outcomes, because there are several variables beyond our control. But including as many of these strategies as we can, depending on the context, is likely to increase students' learning outcomes. When I speak of learning outcomes here, I'm primarily referring to content knowledge. So think about personalization, right? So often it's become almost a buzzword of, hey, this is personalized, hey, this is differentiated. Ask the question, how? How is it differentiated? How is it personalized? If it is to a student's prior knowledge, based on a reasonable assessment, that's perhaps way better than just saying, hey, it's personalized to a person's learning styles, which, by the way, is a myth. Let's also think about, does your product include formative assessments, where students are running assessments or are taking assessments for the purposes of learning rather than just assessments of learning? Ask yourself or identify, hey, are there ways for me to connect concepts across different components of the content or the curriculum, across subjects? There's also the other opportunity for us using EdTech to chunk our learning in very specific pieces of key ideas, of central ideas. That piece might be slightly harder for us to do unless we have a crystal clear understanding of what the central ideas of that content is. And I understand what I'm saying might sound like, gosh, this is a lot of work. And it is. It is hard work, but that's the beauty of EdTech. We can do the hard work once, so teachers can get to leverage that for thousands and millions of students forever. Working through all of those pieces, just working through content or the presentation of content is one way to leverage the sense of learning, but also thinking about how it influences our user interface, keeping it light, keeping it simple, keeping it easy to use. If a learner has to use more resources to figure out how to use your tool, not only is it leading to a poor customer user experience, it is also hampering their learning. Their cognitive resources are going to go towards understanding the UI and figuring out how to submit an assignment rather than focusing on doing a better job on the assignment. So work through your UI in terms of how much brain power is this going to take. All of this comes down to this big idea of our learning being like a tank. We have only so much capacity of learning, of resources, of cognitive brain power. What am I going to use it toward? And with that, our video comes to an end. I'd love to chat more with you, so if you have any thoughts, questions, ideas, feel welcome to reach out on LinkedIn or email or website. We'd love to hear from you. Signing off, this is Dr. Kripa Sundar from EdTech Recharge.